Well, it's that time again for Cruising on the Edge, where there's real talk, real recovery, real purpose, and real results. I'm your host, Carol Cruz, and I am so excited to be joined today by my guest co host and friend, um, Joseph Green. Joseph is a storyteller, educator, and narrative disruptor who has spent more than two decades helping people understand the power of lived experience. Through thousands of workshops across the country, he has helped individuals and organizations use storytelling as a way to build connection, empathy, and real change. So today's conversation really is going to explore the question around who's telling your life story, breaking free from narrators in our minds. So if this is your first time here, and you're in the right place. So grab your favorite beverage and take a breath, and let's get into it. All right. Welcome, Joseph. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm so excited. I know we haven't seen each other in a couple of years, but our first meeting was on a virtual platform during COVID in 2020. I was actually one of the organizers for Mobilize Recovery. He said, you've got to, get connected with Joseph Green. I had really only tapped into storytelling at that time and spoken word, and I was just in awe. I don't like to call it performance. I feel it's an art that
Mm.
you have, and it connects people to their story and to your story. And that's what I hope that people are going to hear today. They're going to hear a bit of you, and also those words of wisdom that you can help others, how you can help others, share their lived experience, or they don't have to get on a big stage or on a podcast. They can speak their truth in all shapes and forms. So yes, please, come on in, Joseph, and share a little bit about what's going on in your life today.
Hi, everyone. Uh, what's going on in my life today? I wish that I was the kind of person that could slide into that answer easily. Let me rephrase that. I'm very happy being the kind of person who doesn't slide into that answer very easily. However, I imagine in situations like this and business conversations
Mhm.
where people are like, "Hey, how are you?" I imagine most people would be like, just do the polite societal thing and be like, "I'm
Mhm.
good." And in my mind, I'm like, man, if I don't say exactly what's going on in my head right now, it's going to take up so much of the pie
Yeah.
that I'm not going to be able to focus on why we're actually here. And
Mhm.
so there's always been this fight when someone asks that question, like, how do you answer? It's very rare that I'm just good. Sometimes I am. I'm
Mhm.
just good. But in this moment, I am just kind of being pulled in all sorts of directions. And I think
Yeah.
it's important to invite that into the space because I know I'm not the
Mhm.
only person, right?
Absolutely.
There's the urgency of our day-to-day lives, the being a human, having to have food and eat and survive and provide for those around us. There's the very serious nature of the work that we do and the people that we help and serve. And then there's like the geopolitical things that are happening around us that all
Yeah.
seem to be so overwhelmingly out of whack that
Mhm.
you have no idea what your place is in it. My wife was reading something on her phone the other day and it seemed really, really important. This is not the other, this is yesterday. And it
Yeah.
seemed really, really important. There's something about airports in DC and I was like, stop. Like I can't do anything about that. But I
Yeah.
am on the couch right now with my kids trying to watch a movie. And like if it's gonna happen, it's gonna happen. Like whatever it is, the existential threat, dread. So in this moment, I am in solidarity and empathy for the people around the world who are in conflict and can't affect it and change it. I am
Yeah.
in solidarity and empathy with the people in the recovery world who will be listening to this that are also in conflict, whether it be internally or externally. I'm really happy to see your face. That brings me joy. My
My
oldest
brother
son
from another mother.
My oldest son just flew in from New Mexico, and
Wow.
he's upstairs playing Minecraft with my youngest son, and that makes me
Mhm.
happy. Um, my wife is putting the pieces of her career back together after all of the craziness that happened last year, and she's upstairs on a call making positive change. And even though we're on spring break and we were supposed to be somewhere else,
Mhm.
uh, there's no place that feels better than when I am in community with my family.
Mhm.
And that could be here, that could be at a resort, that could be under a underpass. As long
Yeah,
as we're together, I feel like there's a chance that good things can happen. So
absolutely. Thank
there's
you
my
so
answer. That's
much.
how I am.
And your answer is your truth, and
Yeah.
I love that. What really came up for me right before getting ready to come on this podcast today. I listen to independent media. I try to limit that. But that's where I get my news, and I believe it's the truth. Rather than some of the other noise that's out there. And, I'll call him out. Don Lemon is one of my favorite, persons. He brings the real, to the conversation. And, he's been in that industry of, newscasting for quite some time. But some things, I find myself like talking to the phone or talking to the screen and saying, this is ridiculous. How did we freaking get here?
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
might throw down a few F bombs, so feel free to do that as well. But it's like we keep shifting on a daily basis. When you think that, you know, I like to keep things not so much completely lined up. I do like to be flexible with my life and my schedules and things like that. But at the same time, like building routine, right? And it's just me, myself, and I. But I still, I see the kids. I saw them over the weekend at an Easter egg hunt. Something as simple and joyful as an Easter egg hunt and then going from there and shifting gears and going to a No Kings rally in the same day.
Yeah.
I gotta tell you, and then having to get on my crisis call work that I do and show up there. So it's not just shifting where we're at physically, it's shifting where we're at mind-wise. And again, we're going to talk about the narratives in our mind. You've done trainings around the critic, the inner critic. That I took that with you several years ago. And that's the thing, we want to have our feet planted. We talk a lot about, you and I have talked a lot about holistic wellness, because we are in recovery, because we know that there are things that we need to keep our mind right, to keep our body in shape, and so on and so forth, as well as being there to show up for our families, and it was something I thought you were about to say, there's no place like home. I was out in Vegas, saw the Wizard of Oz, at the Sphere. And the moment where Glinda comes in, when Dorothy lands in the land of Oz and everything turns from black and white to technicolor. That's what I want to believe is going to happen for us. I
Yeah.
know it sounds pretty woo-woo and fantasy, but I really truly believe that what we are up against in this nation is black and white. And it's hard to find those moments of technicolor. But when it goes to Easter egg hunts or having your kids together, your son, flying in, even though you didn't get to travel, you still have your family, and there's no place like home. It's a place that's safe. It's a place where you can control the narrative, right? And when either one of you, your wife or yourself, start going off on the other way on a tangent, you're there to support each other.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what we do for people in recovery.
Yeah, no,
Right.
it's a beautiful, that right there is a beautiful, string, I guess, or lesson or moral to pull out of it, because that's what it is. It's so important, if you are seeking balance, to surround yourself with people, one, who know you, who
Hmm.
you're able to be yourself with so that they can know you. I was
Right.
thinking that, me and my wife know each other so well at this point that when we are going off on a tangent, or we're deciding to be bleak, or we're making an excuse for something, like, we can call the other person out with love,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm. Yep.
And I
Call it
think that's,
forward.
yeah,
Remember, we were calling
pulling them
people
in,
forward.
calling them
Yeah.
forward, yeah, into their purpose, into their best versions of themselves.
Hmm.
And I think that is, I we are raising our kids to try to feel like they can do the same with
Yeah.
us,
Yeah.
not just like, "Daddy, what's wrong?" But like, "Hey, you're happier when we go outside. You wanna go outside? You wanna get some
Yeah.
fresh air?" You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, being able to interject in ways that we weren't allowed to interject when we were kids.
Hmm.
And I think that that's something that is powerful, both in homes, but, like, in workplaces also, and places of healing. Any place
Yeah.
where you are at is, if you can bring, there's a safe amount and an appropriate amount of yourself to bring into certain spaces depending on the environment. But, like,
Hmm.
the only way to hold the world accountable to treating you well and treating you how you want to be treated is having
Hmm.
the audacity and the courage, to be yourself in
Yeah.
places. And
Yeah.
so I think that's what it is. I feel most comfortable around my family because this is where I get to be the most of myself.
Hmm. I love that. And I'm just going to go
Yeah,
into a
let's go.
reading from the Living of Life Awareness by Don Miguel Ruiz. And it was interesting when I was just checking in with you earlier last week. This reading, and it's not a daily reading. It doesn't have like the dates on it. So I just keep rotating. It's not 365 days of reading. And Don Miguel Ruiz Jr. is the son of Don Miguel Ruiz, who wrote the Four Agreements, actually the Five Agreements. And again, another holistic, tool that I get to use on a daily basis that helps me in my own personal recovery. But the chapter that I was reading, or the reading the entry that I was reading was called Narratives. So I'm gonna read it real quick, just a quick overview. So Don Miguel, he says that part of human experience is that we are constantly describing, judging, and classifying everything that happens around us. Those voices in our mind interpret our experiences through the lens of what we already believe. And because of that, our narrators often try to fit new experiences into old stories. The challenge is that when we do that, we can get pulled out of the present moment and stuck comparing everything to the past. But he also reminds us that everything is important. The narrator may talk and talk, right? But they are not who we truly are. Awareness helps us to recognize the differences between the voices in our mind and the authentic voice of who we really are. Joseph, when you hear that, what shows up for you in your life?
So, you know, um, I do a lot of workshops, and
Hmm.
one of the things that we do at the beginning of a workshop is create agreements for how we're going to interact with one another. And typically, I have a bag full of ideas, but you send it around the room, you let them break off into small groups, and you say, what's important for you to bring into the space? Not to, I try to word it not to feel safe per se,
Hmm.
but to feel courageous, right?
Yeah.
Because in these spaces, it's hard to guarantee safety because if you're
Uh-huh.
being courageous, there's a chance that there's something dangerous around, right?
Right.
But what we can tell folks is if you do fall, we'll be here to carry you and pick you up. If
Uh-huh.
it does bruise, we have ways to, hold folks accountable and walk into healing. But one of the things that always comes up is no judgment, no judgment, no judgment, no judgment. And that is one of those, I think, oversimplifications that we brought in from the way we talk to children and the way we were
Uh-huh.
talked to as children.
Yeah.
And I think, ultimately what we're trying to say is don't turn don't turn off to me because
Mhm.
of something that I have done or something that I am, right? So if I admit that, oh, I had this racist thought once, or
Mhm.
I'm having this racist thought right now, or
Right.
whatever it may be, like, judge, because that's what human beings do, right?
Mhm.
We have bias, we try to figure out this how we have survived it this long, but
Mm.
like, don't shut me out because of a decision I've made or who I am or how I look or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's what people are trying to do with the no judgment thing. And
Mhm.
so in that statement, like the first thing I heard, like it kept going. It started with, on one side, um, be careful not to hold folks against the comparison of your past things.
Mm.
So, I often tell a story when we're in a bias training about how my bullies growing up were like white dudes with like polo shirts. And like, I've always had this thing, like it takes an extra amount of effort for me to give someone who brings that feeling up in me, to
Uh-huh.
give them the benefit of the doubt, to like find out who they are beyond whatever they may be wearing or the skin that they have. Like I have to consciously do that.
Mhm.
So the first thing is like, you're going to miss an opportunity if you're not here right now with this person.
Right.
But then it goes on to say it's super important that all of our experiences matter, right? And so that's when what I hear in all of these sayings is we're seeking balance, right? We're
Yes.
seeking the ability to use our past to help us, not harm us. The help
Mhm.
is, I want to be able to foresee danger, but I also want to foresee times where I may have lost an opportunity for being presumptuous or
Mhm.
hiding in my bias because of fear, because someone who looks like you or in this place
Mhm.
made me hurt in the past,
Right.
right?
How do you see
So
me? Yep.
yeah, so I learn so much about myself
Mhm.
and about people when I intentionally lean in, when my judgment tells me, hey, maybe you shouldn't. And that goes back, is interesting. So the inner critic work I first did with Rosie Greenberg, which we
Mhm.
all
Yeah.
know and love. And the main point that I pulled from her process was that voice is still in love with you. That
Mhm.
voice is still trying to help you. It's scared for you because it was there when you got hurt last.
Right.
And
It's your
but the question
protector.
is,
Mhm.
like, can you have a relationship with that voice where warning, but
Mhm.
also warning, maybe we just need to step into this differently and not
Mhm.
completely run away from this experience.
Yeah.
And I mean, there are a number of times where that has served me well. So may I give an example?
Absolutely.
Cool.
Please.
So I
You
used to
can
run.
you can even break out in spoken word, and
I'm
I
sure.
know everybody they'll raise my numbers.
I met So I used to run a mentoring program in DC,
Uh-huh.
and every year we got to go to like GW, George Washington University, and
Uh-huh.
Georgetown to their intern fairs. And so the college students were looking for places to do internships and get real
Uh-huh.
life experience. And so, we set up this table. It was me, a black male, and another woman who was a black female, and we're kind of swimming in this sea of non-black folks, non-folks of color,
Yeah.
because of the colleges that we're at, and
Mhm.
how the nonprofit world oftentimes is. run
Mhm.
by white
One-sided.
folk. And
Yes.
so we're
Yep.
in this room. We're not the only black people, but we're in this room and we're in the minority. And so we assume that we're just going to draw people to us that, see us and think, oh, I might have something shared with that person's lived experience. I might want to work there, so on and so
Mhm.
forth.
Uh-huh.
Um, the second year we did it, this very large white male who looks like a mixture of, like, if you were casting Captain America, this is your guy, right? I
Okay.
mean, just broad shoulders, nice hair, and friendly as
I
all
put
get out.
things
But like,
down and I pick things up.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I'm just like this guy right here, and he immediately annoyed me, right? Like
Mhm.
no fault of his own, but just like my biases and my trauma and my past was bubbling up behind me, and I'm like,
His
this
energy
dude is
wasn't
not working
mixing.
with our young people
Yeah.
because I know where
Yeah.
we work in DC, and like we're here now, we're dressed up, but that's
Mhm.
not what we do out there. So if you
Right.
can't exist in that space, like if I can code switch to being here, you're going to have to be able to code switch to be out there. And if you
Mhm.
can't do that, this is not for you.
Right.
But whatever it was, we just got into a conversation. And it was enough for him to want to submit an application with us.
Mhm.
And we weren't the only deciding people, and he made it onto our team. It was two, we picked two people, and we got two people. And Captain America is now on my team as we like do this after
Mm.
school mentoring program with like
Wow.
students who like only run into white folks on the metro, right?
Mhm.
Or
Mhm.
or as a teacher in school, and it's very or as a police officer. And this
Yeah.
dude definitely looked like he could be a cop. Um, so we get into the year and everything is going relatively well, but I never let my guard down. And
Mhm.
honestly, if I had been talked to the way I talked to him, I might have gotten aggressive with the person who was like trying to train me because I did a
Mhm.
lot of talking down, a lot like, yo, you don't know what's about to happen here. Yo, you
Mhm.
just go stand over there and let me handle, like that
Right.
kind of thing. And he took it like a champ, and he showed up every day that he was supposed to be there. He was never late. He was on time. He always had a positive attitude. And then we get to the end of the semester, and we're having conversations with them about what they want to do next.
Mhm.
And like this dude wants to
Excuse
be
me.
a police officer.
Okay.
And I was like, tell me more, right? As a son of military parents, every member
Mhm.
of my family's like has been in the military. I have an interesting relationship with service and rebellion, right?
Yeah.
Like I understand why people go into the service. I also think it's really important to ask questions and not just go in because of a perception that you may have. And so
Mhm.
this guy comes from a place where police officers are trusted and
Mhm.
and are
They
a
got their
positive
own
part of his
code too.
community. Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
And so in his mind, he thinks I want to be a police officer because police officers do good. And I wanted to challenge that idea that the only way for him to do good was to
Mhm.
become part of a system wherein if there was bad, it is
Mhm.
really difficult to fight back against that, right?
He had to
It's a
break free from
fraternity. And
that.
so if you get
Mhm.
into that space, no matter what your intentions may be, you're one of many. And it's really difficult to do the kind of work that I felt he wanted to do with that particular uniform on, the way that we engage
Right.
police in our community. And that's a long conversation for another day. But
Part 2.
at the end of the day, he left out, I didn't know what he was going to be, what he was
Mhm.
going to end up being. He went out into the world, and a few years later, we caught up online, and I get this really long, like Instagram DM from him. And it wasn't like you were the catalyst that changed my life, but it was like the conversations that we had opened my mind up to
Wow.
see that there was a more effective way for
Mhm.
me to be helpful to the communities that I wanted to help, right? Like going in and being a police officer, which is you know, for the most part, a tool of the system. They do what
Mhm.
the system tells them to do,
Right.
as opposed to being somebody who was a social worker or
Mhm.
a counselor or even a teacher for that part.
Right.
I needed a space where I had more flexibility so I could meet the people I wanted to serve where they were, right?
Mhm.
And that message to me, that story in and of itself, I think is the epitome of what was being said in that quote, right?
Mhm.
If I had allowed myself to stay in the past
Right.
and be so influenced by the past that I didn't give the present a chance,
Mm,
I might not have had that conversation with him.
right.
And I think about all of the positive effect that he has had on people's lives and then the residual positive effects that go out from that space because he was raised by people who taught him to listen
Mhm.
before deciding, right? Even though he had all the privilege in the world, he could have just walked through life for the most part, thinking my way of thinking is right. And there are going to be very few people who argue with that. And, why am I going to change? Whoever brought him up,
Right.
right? Whoever his influences were,
Sorry.
they gave him that value of, I'm going to listen. If I respect a person, I'm going to sit and I'm going to listen and see what I can learn,
Mhm.
right? And I was taught to give to those who are willing to receive,
Mm.
right? Regardless of how you may feel about it. And this gentleman was willing to receive. So who was I to keep what was never mine
Hold
in the
back
first
from
place,
that.
right? The
Yeah.
wisdom that
Yeah.
I have is not mine, it's given to me,
Right.
right? I'm a vessel. And I think that's where we have choices as people, right? We don't have a choice about the good or bad that happens to us, but
Mhm.
we do have a choice about how we respond when fear presents itself as an option,
Right.
right? When doing the wrong thing presents itself as an option, that's where you do have a choice. What type of conduit of energy do you want to be? And so that's what I get from that quote. It reminds me of that story and that young man who I check in on every once in a while who still seems to be doing pretty well for himself.
Mhm.
Um, and even if he didn't, even if he switched up and became something awful, I would have to ask, what experience did he go through
Yeah.
and
What
like, can he still
changes?
be reached and
Yeah.
go back and try to figure it out? And,
Mhm. What
and I think that's
influenced
the other
you?
thing too. This idea that things have to last as perfect forever
Uh,
to make it worth your while to do it. I work in schools a lot and the conversations and people are so scared to make decisions and try new things. And because, what if it doesn't work?
mhm.
Well, I mean, what's happening right now doesn't seem to be working. And we
Right.
took a lot of time to think
We're
about that.
trying it anyway.
let's
Oh
try, let's
gosh.
try,
You're throwing
and
it in the middle and seeing what comes out, what
seeing
bursts
what
out.
comes out because the
Yeah.
constant is your ability and willingness to adapt and change. Right.
Right.
That's a weird thing to say, but the idea of it. Like the world is going to world and life is going to life. And
Mhm.
the question is always, not how do we make a perfect world, but how do we make ourselves resilient and capable of joy
Mhm.
and grace in the world that we exist in.
Despite what's going on around us.
Yeah.
It's so many things that you said, Joseph. I'm going to tap into a couple things, even in what I experienced over the weekend, and what I've been, experiencing in my life. Growing up in predominantly, with raised by a white mother, in Jersey, on an area where there was no one that looked like you and I. It came in very late in, at that time, my addiction had already started. And so when I think of, the influencers again with my mother and how, the messages and narratives that she would provide to me in regards to my father, who I didn't have a long-term relationship with, and I now have a better relationship with my oldest brother who is still living. I wish I had also that same experience with the other brother who passed away back in 2016. But at least we got to see each other after 30 plus years. And, I think of the messaging my mother had, and I don't want to say that my mother was racist, because of course, she you know, and got involved with a black man and had me, I came out of the mix. but I believe her bias and her prejudice, um, in our culture, really, uh, uh, I avoided wanting to learn more about my Blackness. And it really wasn't until, a mobilized recovery where I was like, the kid in the candy shop. I'm in my Blackness, starting the inclusivity caucus and things like that, and meeting other people. And it's not that I wasn't, you know, uh, I didn't meet up with other people, folks of color. It was scarce. But I was taken from a very all white conservative community and put into Paterson, New Jersey, you know, and culture shock and trying to navigate who I was when I had no idea. So what I end up developing is these two sides. I allowed if I was around Hispanics and Black folk, that's how I would take on that persona or that presence, right? I did poorly because, there was no getting away or changing how I spoke. Um, and again, I don't want to sound like I'm stereotyping any culture, but in a sense, that's what was happening. And then when I was, with the white folks, I was like, oh, that's nice. And just had no sense of that energy, or that things that lit me up. The only thing that lit me up, growing up was my music and the arts and getting on stage and pretending to be somebody else. That's what lit me up because I was I felt so ashamed of what you saw on the outside. And I don't regret. I was, that regret and fear was there for a very long time. But I realized that that was a platform for learning to who I wanted to be and who I didn't want to be. And, changing the narrative was my responsibility, right? I had to get deep in vulnerability to say, I might mess up. I'm going to fail, but I got to do it anyway. Or I'm going to stay stuck. And that again with addiction. Addiction was the same thing. I got involved. Starting to hear a little crackle from my earphones. I'm not sure if you can hear it. But addiction again transformed me into someone else. Gave me that sense of what I thought freedom, until it overtook me. Gave me that sense of I don't give a shit who you think you know who I am. This is who I am. But it also, oops, okay, stop
I'm
doing
not
that.
hearing it.
You're not hearing it?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll edit it out if it does come up.
Yeah.
So over the weekend, I said, I went to the Easter egg hunt with the triplets
Mhm.
and my son and my ex at his church, and then went to the No Kings rally. And now I have avoided, like, this is my platform for revolution, freedom, and so stepping out into my community, which is, again, I live in a predominantly white town, Milford, Connecticut. There are a few of us scattered, amongst the crowd. But going downtown and being amongst many, I'm going to tell you the group of folks, and I'm going to say maybe there was about 500 people. That's a guesstimate. Majority were people over 30, mostly a lot of seniors, a lot of probably baby boomers or 60 revolutionaries, burning their bras and things like that they did back in the 60s and 70s, were out there, peaceful protesting. And I took Cruising on the Edge, and I interviewed a few people. I had my selfie stick and things like that, and I asked people why they were there. What were they passionate about? What did they want to see change? And we know as people in recovery, change took a long time to kind of gravitate to, but I'm listening to the speakers. I listened to the mayor. I'm going to set up a meeting to interview the mayor. He's our new mayor, um, Mr. Smith, Mayor Smith. But long story short, and then I found a couple of young men, and I said, how do you feel about the shit that we're leaving you, basically? And I love their honesty. I love their if they were afraid to talk to me or just to put it out there, I didn't see that. I didn't see that. They really spoke from their heart, the wanting change, knowing that change happens in numbers. It's not something that we all can, do alone. That we need to find those sense of allies, to walk alongside of us.